Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video of Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge here on the internet. Alright, today's video was chosen by our Patreon members. It is WatchMojo's video on the top 10 worst decisions in history. So this video was chosen in this week's poll. How this works is all our Patreon members are able to vote in a poll to get a video featured on the channel for that week, and this is what they went with. So I'm interested to do this because WatchMojo is a huge channel on the internet, and they do lists, lots of lists. And the thing is, though, they're not a history channel. They're a very casual type of channel. So I thought maybe it'd be interesting too to check out more of a casual channel when they talk about history, and with a list video, you know, see what again a more casual type of background might put in a list for worst decisions in history. So I think this will be interesting to check out and see what kind of criteria I guess they use and what I guess they ended up coming up with. If you like the original video, a link to it will be down below. You can give them a like and subscribe. If you haven't subbed to my channel, I'd love to have you around in our community. Just hit that sub button, enable notifications for knowing when live streams and video premieres happen. And again, love to have you around in our community. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So they did a list, top 10 worst decisions in history. All right, let's see what they. All right, see what they do.
Ever made a bad choice you'd sooner forget? Imagine being
Never.
one of these people.
Never.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 worst decisions in history.
Let's go ahead real quick and make some predictions. All right. When things come to mind, what are the classical things, especially from a more casual approach, people might say? Is it going to be attack on Stalingrad? I mean, if you go especially from the modern sense, something with the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, again, I'm only thinking with military decisions here. Take a minute and think. What do you think will be there? I think it can go a lot of different ways.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. For this list, we're looking at iconically bad choices. The ones that end an empire, incite a war, or are just plain dumb when you look back in retrospect. These head-slapping decisions are ones that are universally agreed upon as stupid. We're gonna try to focus mainly on military decisions for this list, excluding entertainment, sports, and things that people didn't do. For example, not killing Hitler. Number 10.
Yeah, I mean, that's not fair. You can't put worse decisions for non-decisions. I mean, that's just not fair, because that opens up a different criteria for all kinds of different things, but we'll see. All right, they've got micromanaging of the Vietnam War. Okay.
Lyndon B. Johnson's micromanaging of the Vietnam War. The year is 1963. The U.S. is in the midst of a brutal war in Vietnam, and their president has just been assassinated. In steps Lyndon B. Johnson, who, just 2 hours after the Kennedy assassination, assumes office.
You know, one of the things that makes the Vietnam War so, interesting, I guess, to study is how many different administrations had influence over it. Going back to military foreign policy for the United States after World War II. So you get into like Eisenhower, right? You're getting into that, but then you're gonna get into later administrations again, like John F. Kennedy. Of course, he gets assassinated, so Lyndon B. Johnson's going to take over. Then you get Nixon, and there's so many different administrations, and of course, everyone had their own kind of way to deal with it, which reduces the amount of continuity that you're going to have in managing something that needs so much managing, like the Vietnam War.
LBJ promptly takes the old adage, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself, and applies it to the Vietnam War, micromanaging it and regularly ignoring advice from military advisors. It wasn't until Nixon became leader of the free world that those best suited for the job were handed the reins, effectively loosening the president's grip on the fight in Vietnam. Number 9. The Maginot Line.
I mean, they didn't really have anything specific there of what specific decisions, so we didn't get any kind of historical input there. I mean, is it to the way they the way the United States justified going into the war, or the idea of like trying to like train people and then have them overtake it, or is it use of troops or technologies or information. Didn't really get anything there, but that would open up a ton of discussion right there for you to have. But okay, the Maginot Line. So they're going to put in the building of it, because already people talk about the Maginot Line as a failure. But is it a failure because the Germans never try to go through it? Because in that sense, I mean, wasn't the Maginot Line potentially a success? Because it was obviously such a formidable beast that the Germans didn't want to deal with it and went around it anyways. Or is it going to be the failure that it didn't extend all the way to the Belgian border? I don't know. Let's see what they do.
When the Nazi Party came to power in Germany, the war machine once again began to chug to life. This made the people of Europe nervous, especially France, who were not anxious to fight their expansionist neighbors again. Hoping to deter a German invasion and citing trench warfare from the previous World War, the French built a state-of-the-art defensive line. However, it did not extend to the Low Countries, the Ardennes forest being particularly unfortified, and sure enough, the Nazis took advantage of this, bypassing their lines easily and taking France. Though it might seem like a laughable oversight in retrospect, this error was no joke at the time.
Okay. So, again, you can look at the Maginot Line in a lot of different ways. Did it keep the Germans from invading France in general? No. But how could it if it didn't actually extend the border? People talk about, why didn't it extend further? Well, there were plans to extend the Maginot Line even further. But you got to understand, too, the Maginot Line was the most fortified military structure basically ever built. Right, a modern-day Great Wall of China with, modernized technologies. Look into it. The engineering of it's brilliant. It is incredible. Now, the Maginot Line, though, was also a civil works project. It was a public works project for after or part of the on the Great Depression. A lot of nations, Germany, the United States, went in public works programs. Right, so you get the government to construct things and for public use of some kind. And I guess the Maginot Line's kind of like that. But it was meant to employ people, and one of the things that the Maginot Line was for was employing people to increase their employment rate during the Depression. Gets people working, gets engineers going, gets job creation and that sort of thing. But also, one reason why it wouldn't be extended along the Belgian border too is also the fact that the Belgians and the French are friendly. They're allies. And building the most fortified defensive structure ever built on the border of a ally also is not necessarily a great PR move. So it makes sense to not start your wall necessarily on that kind of border. You want to do it on your border that you shares with your historical enemy, which of course is the Germans and French. But yes, of course, this could be an issue too, because history already showed that when invading France, the Germans will go through a place like Belgium, the lowland states, which happened in World War One, and of course happens again. So in a way, you could think of it as a success because they didn't try to fight through it. But yeah, it could be seen as a failure because if the goal was to stop it from invading France at all, then yeah. All right, so we got Mao here. Are we going to see Cultural Revolution or Great Leap Forward? What are they going to do here?
Number 8, Mao's Great Leap
Okay.
Forward. Murdering millions of your own people is always a bad idea, but that's just what happened in China during the early to mid-20th century. In an attempt to rapidly industrialize the nation, the communist leaders tried to institute a demand for crops that the people could not meet. The resulting famine caused deaths around the country. However, famine was not the only cause of death during the Great Leap. Many reports of torture, beatings, and suicides have surfaced throughout the years. An exact death toll is nigh impossible to nail down, but it's been estimated at anywhere between 23 and 55 million people. And no amount of progress is worth such a steep cost.
Okay, so the Great Leap Forward, they went into only a little bit, but the Great Leap Forward, again, was basically a superhuman effort to try to economically grow China. They have a large population, so a lot of it was agricultural. Another big thing about the Great Leap Forward was they tried to industrialize quick. When you look at like what Stalin was able to do with 5-year plans and make the Soviet Union into like an industrial power with basically superhuman efforts, China goes through a similar thing. But it was a lot more challenging for them. Now, China's still an agrarian, was still an agrarian society, still is. So it was about getting agricultural input or output increased. Ends up having a massive backfire. Now, one of the failures too with the Great Leap Forward was the fact that China was also selling their grain and or just their agricultural products too, which bypassed the local population, leading to a lot of starvation. But one of the interesting stories about the Great Leap Forward was the way that they were hoping to promote industrialization too was by promoting the idea that metallurgy, metal manufacturing, could be done basically by citizens virtually in their backyard. And they're trying to make these like iron steel mills in their backyard, and it was super dangerous because you can't just build one of these metal little mini metal factories and machines to build this stuff and know what you're doing without training and the resources. And it was very dangerous, and also the product was severely low quality, and then nobody would want it to do. The Great Leap Forward was a giant step backwards for a lot of things. I mean, it ended up creating the largest famine of the entire century, one of the largest famines in world history, actually. So yeah, it's absolutely a worse decision. Definitely worthy of being on a list.
Number 7, Napoleon's invasion of Russia.
Okay.
The French
We all know it. You don't invade Russia, and you don't invade them in the winter. Could have put this in a pre-predictive kind of thing too. So, yeah.
seemed to catch a
Not
break on
hard.
this list. The Little Corporal's grand army of 680,000 soldiers strolled into Russia hoping for a quick and easy defeat, only to find the Russian forces to be constantly retreating. Using what's known as a scorched earth tactic, the Russians would burn down villages so that the pursuing French army would have no supplies to feed their vast numbers. Eventually, winter came, and the French forces were subject to starvation, hypothermia, and eventually, defeat. It was a harsh lesson, but one that every military leader has since taken to heart.
Not the only time, by the way, the Russians have used their geography to their advantage. The scorched earth policy, you're going to see it other times in Russian history too. The idea that, especially if you're attacking from Europe, to get to the Russian heartland, you got to be pretty far away from your homeland. And when Napoleon sends basically like 500,000 troops into Russia, they come very far away from their supply lines, right? And the idea is you basically do a structured retreat and destroy your resources while you do that. Now, that sounds really crappy if you're a farmer or something. You're destroying your own farms or something like that. But in the end, it helps because the further you get away from your supply lines like the French do, the more you're going to rely on the local resources for things like food. So the further away Napoleon's troops are going to get, the harder it's going to be and the more prone they're going to be to not having resources and starving. And then, of course, you get the big killer of Russia, and that is the winter, that everyone seems to underestimate. They didn't have the resources, the clothing and stuff like that to be able to fight there. And Napoleon loses virtually the entire, between, I've seen the number though, they said 600 something thousand. I've seen that around 400,000. I have to double check on the numbers exactly, but I believe like 95 or 90% or something of his soldiers don't end up making it back, and they come back. The ones that do are basically look like skeletons and are starving to death in tattered clothes. Napoleon never recovers from this because not long after this, virtually the entire European continent ganged up on him, and he gets defeated at Waterloo and etc.
Never underestimate the environmental factors when fighting on enemy soil.
Yeah.
Number 6,
True
the
that.
Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Good.
Now it's
Good
time
one.
for the Russians.
So they're definitely sticking things more modern, especially, you still got to consider Napoleon. I mean, that's considered one of the more first modern real wars. So they do seem to be sticking with that. I wonder if they're going to go any earlier though.
Or in this case, the Soviets to take a beating, as the 1979 invasion of this Middle Eastern country was decidedly not a win for them. Wanting to protect communist interests in the country, the Soviets sent over 100,000 soldiers after the assassination of the president of the Afghanistan Communist Party. However, due to the alien nature of the communist way of life, an Afghani and Muslim resistance rose up with monetary aid from a certain Western capitalist arch-enemy of the
America.
Soviets. The ensuing conflict would result in the death of almost 15,000 Soviet soldiers, a Soviet withdrawal, and a continued civil war in the country. Number 5.
Okay. Afghanistan had always been in a tug of war, cold, and just in even well before the Cold War, being in a tug of war. You go back to like the Great Game when Russia and Britain were sort of competing for Afghanistan. So Britain competing from their holdings in like India, so coming up from like the south, and then Russia coming down from the north. Afghanistan has always been torn in the middle of these like what they consider Western nation. Kind of like tug of war that Afghanistan was often in the middle of. All right, toppling of Hamid Mossadegh in Iran. Okay. Yeah, we'll see where they take this, but yeah, there's definitely a domino effect that's created here.
Toppling of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran. Once again, we travel to the Middle East, but this time it's some devotees of capitalism that would make the mistake. The mission was known as Ajax in the US and Operation Boot in the UK, but the principles were the same: protect Western oil interests in Iran. How? By overthrowing the democratically elected prime minister and installing a monarch more sympathetic to the US's and the UK's demands.
So similar to, Afghanistan, the Cold War basically put the planet into having to decide between a side, right? American-backed capitalism or Soviet-backed communism. And Iran was one of those places, especially when you get places in the Middle East that have resources, that both nations would love to have. Both nations were always influential all over the world in making sure the leadership of certain nations were favorable towards their kind of way. And that's going to happen, here. The United States would like a pro-Western influence for whoever's governing in Iran, and they would pit each other against that. But again, what becomes the hard thing is when you take out like a democratically elected leader. And that's hard because people would say that there's hypocrisy in that okay, it's like America supporting democracy, right? But there's a democratically elected leader, they like that idea, but not if that person necessarily is going to be against American interests, right? So it catches America in a very peculiar situation. It's happened multiple times across the world in the Cold War era.
That's exactly what they did. The CIA even hired local mobsters to incite riots. What followed was the death and subjugation of many of the Iranian people, and a period of unrest that would eventually lead to the Iranian Revolution of 1979.
That's the big one.
Number 4, Hitler invading Russia.
Amazing, you get invading Russia twice already. Will anyone learn, right? Hitler was somebody who learned a lot. I mean, it was very well versed in history, and people talk about that. Why was he repeating the mistakes of the past when he was so well aware of the past? Now, of course, when Hitler invades Russia, he had already been very, very successful in a lot of things. So maybe thinking it wasn't, they could stop that. But also, as part of the big Lebensraum plan of Germany tried to create more living space and food resources. And then the big thing is oil. I mean, it's oil. Yeah, Hitler needed oil to continue any kind of military activity, and the resources were not enough in the territories that he controlled. So some people will say that Hitler had to invade Russia.
There's a quote that reads, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat
Sure.
it." And that's exactly what the Nazis did in 1941. Despite studying Napoleon's first invasion of Russia as reference, the Nazis' attempted invasion of the Soviet Union resulted in a catastrophic loss of life. And in the eyes of many, it was the downfall of the Third Reich. Just like Napoleon, they planned on achieving a swift victory that never came. Yep. Operation Barbarossa, as it would come to be known, lasted over 5 months and resulted in over 5 million deaths.
Remember, too, that the Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin had a non-aggression pact. They had a pact that they were not going to fight each other, and it was Hitler that went against that. And Russia, the Soviet Union was not a threat directly because they had this peace treaty that seemed to be working just fine, which also, by the way, allowed Nazi Germany to attack or fight a single front war in the West, unlike what Germany did in World War I, is having to fight a two-front war, which allowed, again, Germany to have so much success in places like Scandinavia or France, because they never had to fight a two-front war. But that brings in another thing, which was did Hitler have the idea or have the plan all along to eventually invade the Soviet Union? It was just trying to keep them out of the war while they are doing things in the West. And once the West was done, then moving to the East. That's a different discussion, but a lot of people tend to agree with that, though.
Number 3. George W. Bush invading Iraq in 2003.
Okay, getting modern
Whether
here.
you believe it was motivated by weapons of mass destruction, the 9/11 attacks, or a need for oil, we can all agree that this 2003 attack on the Middle East was divisive for the American people and devastating for the Iraqi. It kicked off a costly 8+ year Iraq war, which, rather than fighting terrorism, arguably fostered it, most notably giving rise to ISIS. On the home front, it turned America into a nation divided, with one half of the population supporting the war
Very true.
and the other half vehemently against it. In other words, some were a little bit country and some were a little bit rock and roll.
The Iraq War changed a lot about American foreign policy, about things like being more, I don't know, willing to do what they consider like preemptive strikes or preemptive wars, potentially fighting or putting troops in a nation with the idea that there was a plausible threat and trying to sort of get ahead of it by sort of attacking first. Also things like the Patriot Act, which changed policy about gathering information on individuals in the United States. And yeah, this story is still very much playing out with what has now happened in a domino effect of destabilizing the region, and then you see the mess the Middle East gets in with different regimes, terrorist organizations. But of course, a lot of this stuff goes back. The whole line of terrorist organizations really actually needs to go back to the Soviet-Afghanistan war, which in a lot of ways radicalized a lot of people as they saw the war with Russia as more Western imperialism in the region and in Western Asia. Because a lot of them get radicalized and then come up that fought in the war with Afghanistan and end up forming groups like Al Qaeda with that. So this domino effect actually goes quite a bit back further than the United States and Iraq War.
Shout out to South Park fans. Number 2, angering Genghis Khan.
Gotta have the Mongols in here with Genghis. Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't want to talk. I just want to hear this because this could be great just for the fact of what the Mongols would do if you did not play by their rules or accept their offerings or reject them.
Many angered the Great Khan during his reign over the Mongol Empire, but none so
Which specific one?
spectacularly as the Alauddin Muhammad II, Shah of the Muslim Khwarezmian Empire. The result of
There's a reason you've never heard of this empire.
infuriating the Khan meant the destruction of Alauddin's
Anymore.
empire. But keep in mind that didn't have to be the case. Genghis wanted peace
Offered
with the
peace.
Shah, saying, quote, "I am master of the lands of the rising sun, while you rule those of the setting sun. Let us conclude a firm treaty of friendship and peace."
The Mongols usually offered peace before they would attack. Now, they would put a lot of stipulations, like, all right, you have to accept our rule, accept that we are the boss of you, give us tribute, give us food, free reign of your lands, and all that stuff. But then we will save you. And of course, that depends if the people think they can put up a fight or they don't want to accept foreign rule. But yeah, because the Mongols were not actually very oppressive rulers under the circumstances. But yeah, if you don't agree to them, that's where you see the Mongols and the Genghis that you hear about. And that happened with them. Declining that the way they did. Yeah, again, like I said before, there's a reason you haven't heard of the Khwarezmi. God, I can never say it. The Persian Empire here. Khwarezmian?
The Shah refused, killing some Mongolian envoys. The result was, as previously stated, less than favorable for the Shah.
Yeah, killing the messengers, which they did. First off, that's supposed to be against all like just internationally, historically accepted thing. You don't mess with messengers, right? They're immune to that sort of thing, and you especially don't do it when it's the Mongols.
It just goes to show, never mess with a Mongol. Before we unveil our number...
And they completely annihilate. They completely obliterate the empire to the ground. It's unbelievable.
Number 1 pick. Here are some honorable mentions.
Invasion of Gallipoli, good. This would probably be a bigger deal if the Allies hadn't won World War One. Ends up killing a ton of people. It nearly ruined Winston Churchill's career because he basically has to resign from head of the Navy, right? And but makes a comeback. But yeah, the worst. Probably a tactical decision made in World War One from the Allied side, but probably again a bigger deal if the Allies hadn't won. Donner Party. So that goes back to in America, the pioneers and movement to settle the West. Donner Party went through a passage that they thought would be a lot quicker to get across the Sierra Nevadas. Ends up doing the exact opposite, and they get caught up in winter in the mountains. And the big famous thing about them is they were starving to death and actually resulted in cannibalism there. All right, what's number 1? Go ahead, take a guess. What do you think it's going to be? What's going to be number 1? Because I definitely thought the Russians, any kind of Russian invasion there. It's going to be a lot of things.
Number 1,
we'll see.
The victorious Allies impose harsh terms on Germany after World War One.
So this was one of the things I said at the beginning. We all know the way that the treaty to end World War One, the Treaty of Versailles, had such a big impact on the creation of World War Two. Pretty easy pick here. Not easy, but safe. Let's say it's safe pick.
The Treaty of Versailles. The moment that would define the next half of the 20th century. The moment that would lead to the rise of fascism, the Nazis, and eventually the Holocaust. After a long and brutal World War I, the victorious Allies were tasked with punishing the losers, and punish them they did. The most important factor of the treaty was that Germany had to take total and complete blame for the war.
And that's, if you truly know World War I's causes, you will not be able to put Germany as a sole cause of the war. You can't. Okay? If you do, you probably didn't understand or really study the causes of the war. Why it often gets accepted is because Germany was forced to agree to this at the end, because if they deny this because it's unconditional. I mean, the surrender here and this, it's unconditional. Germany was going to lose. They have to sign it, otherwise their country gets invaded. But yeah, if you truly know, you can't do that.
Which meant they had to disarm and pay reparations to all affected countries.
Yep. Pay the bill for the war, dismantle your military for the future, right? And there's no way Germany can be successful after that, which is why it grew so much resentment. You get the breeding grounds for Nazism and Adolf Hitler.
This would virtually bankrupt the European country and set the stage for a very sinister time in human history.
Interestingly, Germany did not finish off paying World War reparations for almost 100 years after it was imposed upon them. I'm talking like 10 years ago. They finally finished off. Now, of course, they weren't making payments under the Hitler years and stuff, but it truly is amazing because there's tens of billions of dollars that they had to pay. They were ordered to pay from that, which bankrupted their country, and the Great Depression started in the 20s for them, where it started for the 30s for everyone else, and again, created the hysteria and just the I don't know, emotional power vacuum that Germany was in that gave the rise to Nazism. Okay. All right, well, what did you guys think? What did you guys think? Did you think that this was a fair list? I mean, other than the Mongols, they all went very, very modern with that, and pretty safe. I feel like pretty safe picks for a more casual site that or channel that these guys operate. But what do you guys think? Would you have mixed them up? Do you have a top 10 list for you think are the worst decisions in history? Put them down in the comments so we can get a discussion. Or better yet, join our Discord server, which has 4,600 people as the time of this video. And you can get a topic, or get going on that topic there and get that going. That would be fantastic. But yeah, what do you think? Do you think this was pretty good? Again, I thought there was a lot of safe picks. This, I mean, yeah, you could probably tweak them around a little bit, but pretty safe all around right there. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks again to all our patrons for being members, supporting history education, and voting in the poll. If you'd like to get involved, go ahead, go down below. You'll see a link to our Patreon account and get involved that way. Thanks again for liking our video, for subscribing, being a part of our community, continuing to support history education. Really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and end things here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.